You know that cloudy, milky water you pour down the drain after rinsing rice? Most people don't think twice about it. But that water, specifically after it's been sitting and fermenting for just a few days, is one of the most effective and cheapest things you can put on your garden soil. And I don't mean it helps a little, I mean it changes the biology of your ground in a way that most store-bought fertilizers genuinely can't. Today on Amish Homestead Roots, I'm going to show you 4 ways to use rice, the grain sitting in your kitchen right now, to build darker, richer soil and grow more earthworms naturally. These aren't internet hacks, they come from traditional homestead practice, and I'm going to walk you through exactly why each one works and how to apply it practically, so you can actually use this starting this week. This channel exists to bring you the old ways that still work, growing knowledge rooted in the land, not a product pitch. If that's what you've been looking for, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. What I have coming on this channel in the next few weeks goes even deeper, and you genuinely don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. Before the first trick, I want to give you just enough background to understand why this works, because if you understand the mechanism, you'll apply it correctly and actually see results. You won't just be following steps blindly. Rice contains wild bacteria and yeast that live naturally on the outer surface of every grain. When you rinse it and let that water ferment at room temperature for a few days, those bacteria multiply into something called lactic acid bacteria, LAB for short. These are the same microorganisms that drive healthy compost, that make sourdough starter active, and that make fermented foods like kimchi and yogurt come alive. You already know these things are real. The same biology works in your soil. The reason this matters for earthworms specifically is straightforward. Worms follow microbes. Wherever soil microbial activity is high, worm populations concentrate. They move toward the food source, they feed, and in that kind of environment, they reproduce more actively. More worms mean more castings spread through your soil. More castings release nutrients in a form that plant roots can actually absorb directly. It's a chain reaction that starts underground and shows up above ground in your harvests. Now, I want to be honest with you before we go further. This is not a process that produces dramatic results in 2 weeks. What you're building with these 4 tricks is a biological environment, not applying a quick fix. Most people start to notice real changes in soil texture, color, and worm density after 4 to 6 consistent weeks of application. Some soils take longer depending on what you're starting with. Depleted, compacted ground takes more time to respond than soil that already has some organic matter in it. But here's what matters. It compounds. Every season you work with this system, the soil gets measurably better. That's not a promise. That's just how biology works when you stop fighting it and start feeding it. That's what traditional homestead farming was built on, not quick results, improving land over time and passing it on in better condition than you received it. Trick 1. Fermented rice water soil, drench. The first trick is fermented rice water. And I want to address something right away, because if you've seen rice water content before and tried it without much result, there's almost certainly one reason why. Most videos and articles tell you to use first wash rice water. That first rinse pulls starch off the grain, and starch alone doesn't do much for soil biology. What you actually need is the second rinse, fermented for 3 to 5 days until it smells lightly sour. That's the version with active lactic acid bacteria. That's the version that actually changes what's happening underground. If you've tried rice water before and wrote it off, try this version before you make that call. Here's exactly how to make it. Rinse your rice once and pour that first water away. It doesn't carry enough surface bacteria yet to be worth keeping. Then rinse the rice a second time, and this time keep that water. Pour it into a clean glass jar or a clay pot if you have one. Cover it loosely, not with an airtight lid, because you need some airflow for the fermentation to happen correctly. Leave it at room temperature, somewhere between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, for 3 to 5 days. In warmer climates, 3 days is usually enough. In cooler conditions, give it the full 5. You'll know it's ready when the water smells slightly sour, almost like mild yogurt or a gentle vinegar. That smell is the lactic acid bacteria telling you they're alive and working. If it smells rotten or like something went wrong, discard it and start again. Ready fermented rice water smells tangy and earthy, not foul. When it's ready, dilute it before applying. This is where a lot of people make a mistake. Applying it at full concentration can actually acidify the soil too aggressively, especially in beds you've already been working with. The correct ratio is 1 part fermented rice water to 10 parts plain water. Mix it in a watering can and apply it as a soil drench around the base of your plants, not on the leaves. You're feeding the ground, not the foliage. Apply this once every 2 to 3 weeks during your active growing season. In a winter garden or dormant beds, you can reduce it to once a month or pause entirely until you're back in the growing cycle. And this is where things start to change, gradually but noticeably. The lab in the drench begin colonizing your soil. They break down organic matter faster, which increases the food supply for everything living underground. Soil that was compacted and pale starts to soften and deepen in color. That dark, almost black tone you see in rich garden beds isn't just aesthetics, it's a visual sign of biological activity. Earthworms, drawn by the increased microbial life, begin moving through those top layers and concentrating where the activity is highest. It won't happen overnight. But in 4 to 6 weeks of consistent application, the difference in how your soil looks and feels under your hands will be real and unmistakable. On traditional homesteads, the women who managed the kitchen garden understood this cycle without naming it. They fermented rice water in clay pots near the vegetable beds and applied it through the growing season as naturally as they watered. They weren't following a protocol. They were participating in a relationship between the kitchen and the land that had been kept alive for generations. That's what we're restoring here. Trick 2. Rice bran worm feeder layer. The second trick targets earthworms more directly than anything else on this list, and it uses a byproduct of rice milling that most gardeners walk past at the feed store without a second glance. Rice bran. Rice bran is the thin layer between the outer hull and the white grain itself. It's what gets removed during milling, and it's extraordinarily rich in B vitamins, naturally occurring oils, phytic acid, and a range of proteins and carbohydrates that soil organisms feed on aggressively. You can find it at agricultural feed stores, Asian grocery markets, or health food stores. It's almost always inexpensive because most people outside of farming communities don't know what to do with it in the garden. Here's where people usually get confused about tricks 1 and 2, and it's worth being clear because it changes how you use them together. The fermented rice water from the first trick works on the bacterial layer of your soil. It's feeding the microbes. This trick works differently. It feeds the worms directly. These aren't 2 versions of the same input. They're targeting 2 different parts of the same underground system. Used together, they create a compounding effect. Used alone, each one still does something real. But the combination is noticeably stronger, and once you understand that distinction, you'll stop thinking of these as separate tips and start thinking of them as one system. What makes rice bran uniquely effective is the speed at which it breaks down. Wood chips take months, straw takes weeks. Rice bran in warm, moist soil can begin decomposing within days. As it does, it triggers what soil biologists call a microbial feeding frenzy. A rapid burst of bacterial and fungal activity that spreads through the surrounding soil. Earthworms detect this activity and move toward it. They congregate, feed, and in the presence of abundant food and active microbial life, they reproduce more quickly. The application is simple. Take dry rice bran and scatter a thin layer, no more than ½ an inch, directly across the surface of your garden bed. Don't bury it deep. You want it in the top 1 to 2 inches, where earthworms naturally travel and where microbial breakdown happens fastest. Then water it in gently to help it make contact with the soil surface and begin working. If you want to slow the breakdown slightly in hot, dry weather, which matters if you're gardening in a warmer US climate, lay a light covering of dried leaves or straw over the top of the bran layer. This holds moisture, creates a cooler microclimate just beneath the surface, and adds a secondary food source as the mulch itself begins to break down. It also keeps the bran from blowing away or drying out before the worms can find it. Apply rice bran every 3 to 4 weeks during the growing season. In raised beds or heavily cultivated plots where organic matter depletes faster, you can apply it every 2 weeks at a lighter rate. This doesn't replace your regular composting practice. Think of it as working alongside it, accelerating what's already happening in the ground. Now, here's the part that actually makes this work long-term, and it leads directly into the third trick. Trick 3. Rice hull biochar for soil structure. This is the trick that most home gardeners have genuinely never heard of. And I want to take a little extra time here because it earns it. The results are real, the science is solid, and once you understand what it does structurally, you'll see why tricks 1 and 2 work even better when this is in place. Rice hulls, the outermost protective layer of the rice grain, are removed during milling and are usually treated as agricultural waste. But when you partially burn them under low oxygen conditions, a process called pyrolysis, they transform into what's called biochar. And rice hull biochar is different from the wood-based biochar that gets more attention in gardening circles for one specific reason. Rice hulls are exceptionally high in silica. When rice hull biochar is incorporated into soil, that silica becomes slowly available to plant roots. Plants absorb it into their cell walls. This physically strengthens the cells, which increases resistance to fungal disease, pest pressure, and environmental stress. Researchers studying rice hull biochar in vegetable production have documented improvements in crop resilience, particularly in brassicas and fruiting vegetables like tomatoes and peppers. But the benefit that matters most for what we're building in this video is structural. Biochar is porous at a microscopic level. When you mix it into soil, you're adding millions of tiny chambers, air pockets, and water-holding spaces that improve both drainage and moisture retention simultaneously. In clay soils, it breaks up compaction. In sandy soils, it helps retain water and nutrients that would otherwise leach away before roots can reach them. And here's the worm connection that almost no one talks about. Earthworms colonize biochar. They move through those pore spaces, deposit castings inside them, and create a living network that makes those spaces permanent biological features of your soil. Biochar that has been worked through by earthworms retains nutrients longer and supports plant roots more effectively than untreated biochar. You're not just improving soil structure, you're building worm housing. Now, I want to acknowledge something practical here. For some of you watching, especially if you're in a suburban neighborhood, making biochar at home by building a backyard fire may not be realistic or permitted where you live. And that's completely fine. Rice hull biochar is available to purchase online and through agricultural supply stores. It's sometimes labeled as rice hull ash or rice hull biochar soil amendment. Either the homemade version or purchased version works equally well for what we're doing. The goal is getting it into the ground, not how you sourced it. If you do want to make it at home, place dry rice hulls in a metal container with a loose-fitting lid. You want restricted oxygen, not zero oxygen. Apply heat from a small outdoor fire underneath for 30 to 45 minutes, then seal the container fully and let it cool completely before opening. What you'll find inside is a light, dark, almost weightless material. That's your biochar. Mix it into your soil or new garden beds at a rate of roughly 10 to 15% by volume, about 1 to 1.5 cups of biochar for every 10 cups of native soil. Work it into the top 6 inches where root systems and worm activity are most concentrated. Unlike the other tricks in this video, you don't need to apply biochar repeatedly. It's a long-term soil amendment. Once it's in the ground, it persists and continues working for years. Most homesteaders apply a fresh layer when building new beds or amending established ones each spring, and then let it work through the season without repeating it. This is where most people get it wrong with soil building. They focus entirely on what they're feeding the soil and overlook the structure that holds everything in place. Biochar is that structure. It's the foundation that makes everything else in this system work better and last longer. We're about to go into the most powerful trick on this list, the one that brings together everything you've just learned and turns it into a single living application you can make at home this weekend using materials you mostly already have. But before we get there, I want to take just a moment. If you've made it this far into this video, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Someone who wants to understand the deeper logic of how healthy land works, not just follow instructions and hope something happens. Amish Homestead Roots is dedicated to that kind of knowledge. Traditional homestead practices, natural growing methods, old-world techniques that have been quietly working for generations, long before anyone was selling anything to fix your garden. We publish new content every week, and what's coming next on this channel goes even deeper into soil health and natural growing systems. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. And if you know someone who gardens and is frustrated with their soil, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they've been looking for. Now, the final trick. Trick 4. The Fermented Rice Compost Activator. Everything in this video has been building toward this. Trick 1 established living bacteria in your soil. Trick 2 fed the earthworms directly. Trick 3 gave your soil the physical structure to hold everything in place. This final trick takes all 3 biological principles and combines them into one application. A fermented compost activator made almost entirely from rice byproducts that creates what researchers in Korean natural farming call a microbial bloom. Let me walk you through it step by step. You need 4 ingredients. First, 1 liter of your fermented rice water from Trick 1. Fully fermented, lightly sour smelling, active with LAB. Second, 2 to 3 cups of dry rice bran. Third, a generous handful of rice hull ash or finely crushed rice hull biochar. It doesn't need to be perfectly processed. Even partially burned hull material works here. Fourth, 2 to 3 cups of raw kitchen scraps. Vegetable peels, fruit rinds, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells are all excellent. Avoid meat or dairy. They attract the wrong kind of bacterial activity and can create an unpleasant smell that lingers. Now here's the ingredient that most people leave out, and it's the one that makes this work better than almost any commercial soil inoculant you can buy. Add a small scoop, about a quarter cup, of soil taken directly from the most productive area of your existing garden or your compost pile. This soil carries its own community of wild bacteria and fungi already adapted to your local environment, your climate, your native conditions. It acts as a starter culture and seeds your activator with microbial life that will integrate naturally with your garden beds in a way that imported bacteria simply can't replicate. Combine everything in a bucket, stir it well. Cover it loosely, not airtight, and let it sit for 5 to 7 days. Stir it once or twice each day, just enough to keep oxygen moving through it. In warm weather, you'll notice it beginning to bubble gently and develop a complex, fermented, earthy smell, alive and layered, not rotten. That activity is your microbial bloom building. That's what you're after. After 5 to 7 days, strain out the solid material and set it aside. Don't throw it away. That solid material is excellent spread directly onto your compost pile or used as a top, dressing around established plants. It still carries active biology. Take the strained liquid and dilute it at a ratio of 1 part activator to 15 to 20 parts water. If your soil is already in decent condition, go with the lighter dilution, 1 to 20. If you're working with depleted, compacted, or clay-heavy ground, use the stronger ratio, 1 to 15, to give it a more aggressive biological push at the start. Apply it as a soil drench around your most important plants, or across a new bed you're preparing for the season. Work it in gently with a garden fork if the soil is compacted. You want it to move through the top 6 inches where worm activity and root systems are most concentrated, not just sit on the surface. What happens in the soil after this application is something you won't see, but you'll eventually feel under your hands and see in your plants. The combination of LAB, rice bran nutrients, silica from the hull ash, and native soil bacteria creates a diversity of microbial activity that a single ingredient application simply cannot match. Within 1 to 2 weeks in warm conditions, you'll typically find noticeably higher worm density in treated areas compared to untreated sections of the same bed. The soil softens. It develops what experienced growers call crumb structure, that loose, moist, almost cake-like texture that plant roots move through without resistance, and that holds moisture without becoming waterlogged. I want to be straightforward with you here. This won't fix severely depleted soil in one application. If you're starting with ground that's been neglected for years, heavily compacted or chemically treated, expect to apply this activator consistently for a full growing season before you see the kind of transformation that makes a real difference. That's not a flaw in the method. That's just honest biology. Soil that took years to deplete takes time to rebuild. But it does rebuild, and it rebuilds permanently, not temporarily the way synthetic fertilizers work. Korean natural farming practitioners who developed much of the modern research base for this type of fermented soil input have documented consistent improvements in microbial diversity and plant health in vegetable crops treated with LAB-based activators over a full growing season. Traditional Mennonite and Amish farming communities across Pennsylvania and Ohio have used variations of fermented kitchen waste as soil builders for well over a century. Without knowing the microbial science behind it, but observing generation after generation that their soil got better, not worse over time. That observation, repeated across decades and across communities, is its own kind of evidence. Apply this activator once every 3 to 4 weeks during your active growing season. Alternate it with your plain fermented rice water drench so the soil receives consistent bacterial support between the deeper microbial bloom applications. Think of the drench as maintenance and the activator as the periodic reset that deepens everything the drench is building. Before I close, I want to connect all 4 tricks clearly, because each one targets a different layer of the same underground system, and understanding how they fit together is what separates people who get lasting results from people who try one thing, don't see instant change, and give up. Trick 1. The fermented rice water drench feeds the bacterial layer of your soil. It builds the microbial foundation that everything else depends on. Trick 2. The rice bran feeder layer brings earthworms in directly and feeds them at the surface, increasing worm density and casting production where your plant roots are most active. Trick 3. The rice hull biochar builds the physical structure that holds moisture, nutrients, and worm activity in place. Without structure, the biology you're building leaches away or collapses under pressure. Trick 4. The fermented activator is the periodic bloom that deepens and resets all 3 layers together. It's what keeps the system from plateauing. You don't have to start with all 4 at once. If all you have right now is rice in your kitchen, start with Trick 1 this week. Get the fermented water going, let that be your entry point into the system. Then add the others as you're able to source the materials. The system builds on itself. You don't need everything perfect to start seeing results. You just need to start. That's the honest version of how this works. Slowly, deliberately, better every season. If this video gave you something practical to work with, something you can actually take outside this week, I'd love for you to leave a comment below and tell me where you're starting. Are you going to try the fermented rice water first? Do you already have rice bran somewhere and want to jump to Trick 2? Or are you ready to put together the full activator from Trick 4? I read every comment on this channel. I want to know what's working for people on the ground, in your specific soil, your specific climate, your specific setup. That's how this community learns together. If you found this useful, please share it with someone you know who's been trying to build a healthier garden and hitting a wall. This kind of knowledge spreads best through community, the same way it always has long before the internet existed. Subscribe to Amish Homestead Roots if you haven't already. New content every week. Next week I'm going into another traditional growing practice that most people have completely forgotten. One that works even in poor, depleted soil and costs you almost nothing to apply. You don't want to miss it. Until then, take care of your ground.